Arabella, thank you so much for having me here today. It's so nice to be here in your studio to talk about you and your work. Obviously, we've got your exhibition coming up at Blenheim Palace, but there's so much history and depth to your work. I felt like it'd be really good to have a conversation with you about that, so that we understand the many layers, literally and metaphorically, in your work.
I was first aware of loving to draw and paint and use colour. We lived at a forge in Milwich in Staffordshire, and the lady we bought the forge from was called Eve Midwinter, so she used to make these beautiful ceramic plates. We went to her studio and there were reams and reams of coloured pencils and coloured crayons and felt tip pens, and it was just like, a sort of child's dream. And so my parents bought me some coloured felt tip pens, and I started doing small little coloured drawings of Godspell and hair, and quite obsessive, and birds and animals. And then sometimes people would come into the antique shop that my stepfather ran and my mother together, and so I'd earn 50p and sell them one of my drawings.
I love that.
And then I concentrated when I went to boarding school. It was a international co-educational school based on the teachings of the Indian philosopher J. Krishnamurti.
And tell me about that. I'm really interested in that sort of history, because that's quite an unusual
Yes.
school to go to. And what was the decision behind that?
Well, my mother claimed that her grandfather read Krishnamurti. I don't know if that's true, because there were two people in the village of Dulverton on Exmoor who went to this boarding school, and they said to my mother, "I think your children would absolutely love it." And my mother, being bohemian and alternative in the 70s, she thought, "I'm going to send my children there." My stepfather was my mother's third husband, and together they set up a jewellery and antique business. So in the 70s, I went to Brockwood. It was my stepfather, my mother's third husband, who was an actor in the Shakespearean Waller touring group around the villages of India. He knew Felicity Kendall and was very much in love with Jennifer Kendall, her sister. But Jennifer Kendall went off with and married a most beautiful Indian film star, Shashi Kapoor. So the connection was when we went to Brockwood Park, based on the teachings of the Indian philosopher. My stepfather organised for my sister and I to go and stay with Jennifer Kapoor in Bombay as part of this exchange in 1979 when I left Brockwood Park. So that started my love of India.
So that was your 1 year that you spent?
Yes.
So what were you doing in India?
I went to these two schools, Rishi Valley, a Krishnamurti school, and another school in Bangalore, and there was a school in Varanasi, Benares. So I did a bit of teaching of very basic English and gave some art lessons and enjoyed being in the school. And there was me and my sister and a friend of my sister's. And we went to the Krishnamurti talks and the lectures in the school. And then I decided to branch off on my own. So I went from Bangalore up to Calcutta on my own, travelled across India to go and work with this English lady who ran a rehabilitation centre for handicapped children. So I worked with her for 2 months.
Okay, let's just reel back. You're in a very, very kind of safe family environment with family friends.
Yes.
And then you gave all of that up to travel on your own.
The initial stage was, will you look after Jane and Arabella and show them around Bombay, and will you look after them for 6 weeks?
Yes.
So the three of us went there, and so we had a family to sort of go to. It was a very strong bond with my sister and I, but I felt necessary for me to go off on my own. That's what I did, and I went to stay in Calcutta, and I loved Calcutta, really loved it. But I knew I had to go back because I had lined up my foundation course.
You had, okay.
Yeah. But I was
so this was always the plan, yeah.
This was my plan. I've always had a plan. I've always had a strategic plan about how I would, manage my career. And
so where was your foundation then? Was that?
My foundation was in Taunton.
Taunton, okay.
But I was in two minds about going back to
I bet,
England.
quite a different culture.
I fell in love with India and I thought, God, I could just stay there. And then I realised, no, I don't want to be on the gravy train of, because it was very much a sort of hippie period and that hippie area. And I could end up just, not doing very much. So I knew I had to go back. So I went back, started my foundation course at Taunton School of Art and Design.
Yeah.
We did everything. My sister also went there as well. So we did painting, ceramics, textiles. And my parents said to me, when I was insisting on doing painting, and my parents said, you've much better chance of making a living if you do ceramics. And I said, no, I put my foot down, I am doing painting.
Yeah.
So I went to Wolverhampton for 3 years, and I think my last and final year was the last year of when students could have access to free canvas and paints because of ILEA and all the grants that were given students. And that's where I met Eileen Cooper, who came down on a number of occasions to teach me, and as did Christopher Lebrun.
Oh, amazing.
And there was Knighton Hoskins, who's no longer alive.
Yeah.
I didn't meet Trevor Sutton until I went for my interview at
that was Chelsea.
Yes.
Amazing tutors to have at Wolverhampton.
Yes, I mean, Eileen Cooper she was the one that taught me how to draw from my imagination.
Was there quite a strong emphasis on painting at Wolverhampton? Was that one of the reasons that you chose to go there?
I'd been given advice, and I think Taunton College of Art and Design had a good relationship with Wolverhampton Polytechnic, because it was a polytechnic. And I think the painting was strong then. They knew I wanted to do painting.
So that was obviously really great.
So
advice.
I had guidance.
Yeah. Because I think, from my small knowledge, I think certain art schools obviously have different styles and different strengths. So, I mean, to be placed with Eileen Cooper must have been an absolute gift.
Well, I was really excited, and she opened my eyes to a different way of working. Because I used to do lots of charcoal drawings of bedroom scenes and still lives, and then I did this hermaphrodite figure, man and woman joined together, and it was a tiny little sketch, tiny little charcoal drawing, and she really liked it. And one of them had horns, and so it sort of refers to this darker side, which I'm, intrigued by in my work. So after I went for my interview at Chelsea, I didn't get in immediately, which is quite good because I had time to go to London. I moved there straight after Wolverhampton to Camberwell, and I found a studio, and then I went and did my MA in Backley's Lane. It was opposite the Laura Ashley factory, and it was brilliant. I mean, a massive studio, like twice the size of this. I shared with an Indian artist.
Perfect.
Reza Vengatra.
Amazing.
Yeah. And we got on well, and we had visiting tutors, and so that's when I met Ken Kiff. And I remember his interview more than the other people. I mean, there were other visiting artists. And we were left to our own devices.
I was about to say, were you much, from what I hear of art school, you're very much left, and it's sort of sink or swim in a way. Because your biggest critic becomes, in a way, yourself. And that intensity of having to sort of have that own drive to take things forward.
Yes, and to have, we were told to, take this opportunity to work large. So I set up a 12-foot by 12-foot canvas, and I had a ladder. This painting was chosen for Nicholas's Treadwell exhibition, Fresh Art, at the Barbican. It was like the biggest painting there. And it was just like, oh, well, I'm going to go for it. What have I got to lose?
So wonderful confidence was given to you by the tutors and by the experiences. And just to have the space.
The space, You couldn't do that in a smaller environment. And there was no, you won't sell something that big, and, don't do that big.
In all of your life, as in every single painting, there are moments in time which are perhaps you can say, right, well, I completed this in May 2022,
Yes.
but actually you began it. It's accumulation of all of your experience goes into that one painting.
Yes.
And that's what is so exciting about, I was going to say working with an artist who's got more life experience, because there's so much that goes into the work.
Yes.
And it's refined, and it's, the ideas are refined, and there's so many different layers. And actually that's what's intriguing about your work is you were just talking earlier, we're in Arabella's studio here, about one of your paintings and how it has like one kind of narrative, and then it's got another narrative and another metaphor here. And I think that's what's wonderful. There's so many different ways of being able to approach your art and look at it, and actually pure aesthetics is just one way.
Yes.
But for me, that's also what makes an artist interesting, where there's the aesthetic, and then there's all of the other angles at which to think about the work, and it adds another sort of contemplative or intellectual dimension to things. And so it becomes a physical object that the viewer can communicate with. And we were talking about this on the phone the other day about this
language.
It's a language, and I think you've really got your, this side of you, it's your language, and it accompanies you throughout your life. So you will do whatever you can to keep this body of work or this side going, which is just natural. Tell me about your first exhibition or early exhibition experiences, apart from that one at the Barbican.
We set up as a company, 30 of us, in my early 30s, the old Lambeth Hospital. And we paid for all the partitions, we got builders in, and so we'd have open studios, and sometimes between 3,000 and 4,000 people would pass through, because two people in particular had really good contacts, and we publicised it. And so I would often sell from there, particularly my monoprints and my Indian drawings. And then every exhibition I would generate myself, like even if I was having a stall at the Kensington Art Fair or the chapel in Islington, there was an exhibition there.
So you found exhibiting opportunities.
Yes,
you were driving it
on my
forward.
own. I wasn't married with children.
Yeah.
And I lived with another artist, but that was what I did. And then it was the exhibition, two-person exhibition with Heidi Dukes, who I was at Chelsea School of Art with. We organised an exhibition in the Crypt Gallery in Bloomsbury underneath, and it was, well, for me it was very successful, because I made quite a pot of money and I was able to go to India. But I didn't know I'd been organising my time to go to work at Artsacre, this Indian artist village, to work with 12 Indian artists. I'd been organising it for a year, but it hinged on whether I could afford to actually pay for my 3 months there. So it was like a blessing, and it was great. One lawyer came with his partner, and she started buying, and it set the red spots reeling. Well, we even took our A5 printed private view cards, and we walked around an area of London. We went into the pubs, we put them on the Rolls Royces underneath the screen wipers. And then I saw Ian Hislop in the pub, so I approached him. I said, "Oh, hello, how do you do? My name's Arabella Ross. I'm having a private view. Would you like to come to the exhibition?" And he turned up.
How has your work changed? I mean, obviously you're not doing 12-foot by 12-foot canvases so much now, but you're still quite large. Has that changed or developed? And also you said to me recently your palette's changing. Maybe you can talk a bit about where your work's been and where you see it going a little bit.
Well, I think it was multicolour tutti frutti, and looking at the seeds and the pods and the leaves and the colours of, my recent trip away, I brought back a whole range of them there, and I thought I really want to get some more earth colours.
Oh, interesting.
Because it makes the colour, the more intense, heightened colour, more alluring. I've always drawn, I love drawing, but I don't literally transcribe what I've drawn onto the canvas. I'll use it as information. So, for example, this is a hugely different palette to this palette, and now with this painting I'm trying to use more browns, and the painting behind, it's got the dark. It's a technique of pouring linseed oil and turpentine and mixing with a beautiful, rich Prussian blue, and seeing what happens and tilting the canvas, and it has its own way of coming out, and it's like a language, and then I add to it the look of accident, but it's not really, because it is controlled, but it looks more free.
Yeah, so it looks free, but it's controlled and experience freedom.
It feels natural to work on something that size, whether it's portrait or landscape, and that size, because then when I try and work smaller, I get quite tight, and I can't throw the physicality of my body into the paintings, because it's nice to, not nice, but when you paint and all these people, you come into the studio and all these people in your head, your friends, what people will think, the sort of imposter syndrome, and slowly they leave the painting studio, and then when the engagement is pure, I leave the studio as well. It's just this process of engagement where I'm not thinking, and there are moments like that, and those are hugely important. So it's in the moment. So when I'm pouring my paint, I'm not thinking, oh, I'm going to have breakfast in a minute, I'll just tilt this like this. Or so it's just like, see what happens, and what comes out can be exciting. So there's always this element, I really want to surprise myself, and then I live with the painting. So I've started to change this, because I wasn't, it was starting to fade, the watercolour, but also I thought, it's a working drawing. I glued the sections together to take in my suitcase. So they're all different sections with masking tape at the back. I folded it over and folded it over again, because I was really determined to have a large piece that I could work on the ground while I was there. And then I'll sit and live with this, and I'll think, how can I incorporate a figure? What do I want to say? And I'm even thinking that I will actually collage some linen on areas that I don't like.
You just triggered something in my mind. I was just thinking about sort of perhaps how your work links to the sort of surrealist movement, and with the automatic painting, people like Miro taking a line for a walk.
Yes.
You know, have you ever thought about that? Or I mean, I just think that it seems to me that there's a sort of a link there in your process, and that kind of subliminal letting go. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
I love that idea, because I wasn't quite sure of the meaning of automatic. But that's a really important element. Something that you can't see in a painting suddenly becomes apparent, like a face or a creature, sort of half animal, half human, or something that suggests that's not necessarily come from my control. So that's how I understand the word automatic.
Yeah, well, I'd also see it as surrealism. I think people kind of think about Dali with surrealism, and I think that's a misnomer, because he's a very specific type of surrealism.
Yes.
And from my understanding anyway, I think it's more to do with the transformation of reality into something which is surreal, which is above reality.
Yes.
And that is kind of what you are doing in your work, and it doesn't have to be this very refined representational narrative that we impose on a painting. So I'm looking here at this sort of winged hare which is on a painting behind you, and thinking, well, how else would you describe that if it's not surreal? But I think sometimes these art history words are quite loaded, but I'm thinking that this is kind of like a natural progression of some of the ideas, you know, about 90 years ago, you know, but it's a sort of 21st century development of that.
Yes, that makes sense.
Are we in the 21st?
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking what century we're in. But, you know, and you know, painting does progress, and artists do kind of look back and think about the ideas that are now freed up by former artists to then progress things in different ways.
Yes, and it's really important to work through influences.
Yeah. And then I'm seeing the face emerges like these Picasso-esque elements, and I feel like there is this kind of maybe this history within your work, this sort of this history of what the other artists are doing, as well as the kind of you know, the fusion of your own kind of influences. I know colour sometimes takes on a meaning for you. Are you fixed about that, or is it, I mean, for example, in one of the paintings that we have coming up in our exhibition, the Prussian blue is a kind of metaphor for grief. Yeah. But the Prussian blue doesn't hold that general meaning for you in other paintings, just in that painting. Because I wondered whether you might associate a particular, or even subliminally,
Yes.
a feeling or intuition with a certain colour, and whether you might turn to a colour when you're wanting to express a particular emotion. Or it sounds like maybe you haven't thought that, it's more intuitive.
Well, I think of blue,
Yeah.
definitely the Prussian blue and ultramarine blue,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
cobalt blues and purples. I
Yeah.
think of them as a really meditative colour.
Yeah.
Possibly I could say a spiritual state,
Yeah.
calm, which is what I'm not when I'm in the studio, because I'm not calm. I'm just like a bit sort of the tautness of the tension in the body that goes to the focus and the concentration. So the Prussian blue in the painting, well, not so much here, but the painting behind of the lady going into the sea, that does relate to grapple with internal issues that threaten to possibly swamp me.
Blue does feature quite a lot, so I'm just wondering,
yeah.
it's almost like it has this transformative power within your painting
Yes,
to kind of signify there's something else going on. It's not really descriptive, because it's used to describe sensations.
Yes.
And, like you say, a meditative state or feeling.
Water.
And water, yeah.
Which I associate always with the unconscious.
Yeah.
Because when I did a whole exhibition of my monoprints, I'd spent 3 months going down to the Embankment in London, and I ended up in 3 months of just drawing regularly.
Yeah.
And then I did the monoprints. So it's being by the water, because water is incredibly calming, whether it's the sea or the river or a stream. Greens and the olive greens and the browns and the browns here. I mean, I think of paint as coloured mud, and I sometimes try to free myself up like a child when I was 4, mixing in those 1970s enamel dishes. I was mixing the mud and I was making a tea for my parents in this little shed in the orchard, and I was furiously mixing it. It's that sense of play. Having an imposter in one's head can be really constricting. It can take away that element of, I'm just going to make a mess, I'm just going to see what happens. And so if I'm working from the top, if the painting's on the floor, I'm sometimes bending over and working from the top, because it's liberating as well. And I think I'd quite like to try working on a proper easel. That's the traditional way.
I can't see you doing that. Why do things in a different way if it's not what...
Yes.
Like, do what suits you.
Yes.
You've said a few times, like, imposter syndrome, and having these people come in, and the sense of kind of pressure, I guess, which I think probably must be internal.
Yes, it is.
It's not like there is actually anyone, but you've got these voices coming in.
Sometimes when I've just started a canvas and I've thought, I'm going to instinctively, I'll use these colours, and then I don't always like what I've done, but I have got something to grapple with. I've got something to engage and struggle with, and out of that can come something unexpected.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, this painting here, it's got a Buddha's face, but initially I had a sort of green face with these slightly angry eyes. I scraped it out, and actually the painting changed. Then I put a stag with horns that didn't look right, and so some paintings are just like struggle paintings.
And also, I guess there's some paintings where they exist for a reason, but they might not be, and they might be one that you want to exhibit, but they're so personal that they just stay like that. They're not ones that, you know, there's painting for different reasons in that sense, and so it's part of the body of work, but it might be so personal that you don't want to show it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You know, because it exposes something that you're not ready to confront. So therefore, there's this kind of editing process naturally when it comes to the exhibition about thinking about what hangs together as a body of work.
I agree.
And it's not that the other paintings aren't necessarily valid, but it's also a question of like, well, actually, this is what we want to present to the public.
Yeah.
And it's just about presenting a continuity and allowing people to access what you want to show them. Like I said, again, it might be that there are paintings that you just don't want to show for whatever reasons. And I think that's kind of natural. Do you work on multiple works at the same time, or is it very much an intense relationship with one work and you feel you've got to get through that one and you move methodically from one to the next, or do you sort of have 3 or 4 on the go,
depending I have on several on the go, because I have done that. I will get really wrapped up in one painting, but also it's really helpful to turn it to the wall and to just start something fresh, because it's a process of contemplation and reflection that's hugely important, having that time to reflect about a painting. And so if I've got a number, I'm not overly focused, and I realise I've destroyed some paintings which I wished I hadn't painted over, but that's the fact of the painting, and that by painting over I've pushed it further. Because then there's the question of the alchemy and that process. So one of my paintings I've called The Alchemist's Mistress, which could be me, because I've got the paint and you get entangled with it and it becomes chaotic and murky sometimes, and I blowtorch it off or I scrape it off, and I have the marks showing through. In the olden times, when alchemists were at work, they would turn these base metals into gold. So it's a metaphor for finding within myself the ability to make paintings that surprise me, but also the grappling with the materials, which I love. I mean, I like the thin, watery quality, the fluidity of thought, the fluidity of the medium, and then there's the more intense and thick pasto, and then there's a different light marks made with, mixing paints together, and so it's a melting pot.
Apart from the obvious kind of influences of your tutors, but whether there are any artists whose work you particularly admire or seek or have sought out, if that makes sense?
Yes, one of my all-time favourites is Malcolm Morley. He's an English-born American artist, and I saw his work, The Spirit of the New, I think it was at the Whitechapel Gallery in the 90s. I just absolutely loved his paintings. He was so photographic and could do anything, of these huge liners of these sort of false people on holiday leading this glitzy life, and then suddenly he changed and he started to do fluid watercolours of his travels in the Caribbean, and he's been a constant source of inspiration. Even now I'll look at some of his work and it's the splatters, it's the marks, it's the gesture. And Joan Mitchell, American abstract expressionist, and Helen Frankenthaler, the working process of being in the moment and seeing how the canvas speaks to her. And so a variety of interests, and obviously Picasso and Chagall.
I wanted to go back to the kind of the ceramics, because we touched on that earlier, and I know that's still part of your current practice.
Yes.
And I'm also thinking about the imposter syndrome and the fact that your parents saw ceramics as the way of making money.
Yes.
You still have that as part of your practice, and it's an amazing part of your practice. But tell us how that fits into everything.
My mother made ceramics. She had a wheel in a tiny little coal shed on Exmoor when we lived in Dulverton. So I saw her working. For whatever reason, she found antique and jewellery more exciting. But my father did a diploma in ceramic sculpture at Stoke-on-Trent in Longton. And so that's why we ended up living at the Forge in Milwich. He's always been fascinated by sculpture. And so his life in London, he lived in London for 23 years in King's Cross, and he would just collect pieces, found objects, and he'd place them together. He made a sculpture garden at Stanley Buildings in King's Cross. And so his influence of being a filmmaker as well and having gone to London Film School, so he was incredibly visual and was always supportive of Jane and I. I mean, he kept everything of our drawings. My father was very supportive, and he really understood, where I was coming from, and he talked about the sort of content and the psychological content of some of my doll paintings. And I would say my mother was more like the material provider, very, very hardworking, always had a lovely home to go to, secure family background, and my father was more someone that you could talk to about whatever you were thinking and feeling.
Amazing.
So I started doing ceramics age 12 at boarding school. I spent a lot of my time in the art room, doing still lifes and paintings, or in the clay room. And I loved making bowls, mostly by coil. When I had my first child, my instinct was to spend more time with my child, so then I stopped for a while, and then I went back to the City Lit I'd actually applied to do an MA.
So you were more drawn to your ceramics after your first child was born?
Yes, I could manage bringing up a child and wrapping up my clay, whereas painting is more, you need the space and the time and the engagement. And then when I started at City Lit, the ceramic diploma, I thought, oh my God, this is my tribe. They're brilliant. I love these ceramicists. I felt totally at home. So I was taught by Ruth Franklin, who's a close friend, and Robert Cooper.
Yeah.
And I found I needed this further information. I needed to continue to educate myself because my mother, she wanted to go to art school. She didn't have the education she would have liked because it wasn't considered the thing to do then by her grandparents, Greek Orthodox grandmother and her colonial grandfather, who were looking after her when she was little, ever since she was little. So they didn't let her go to art school. And she often would read and read and read to educate herself. So in some level, I feel I'm doing what's really important for women to do to educate themselves at whatever age. And even if I'm 90 and I need to go back and do another MA,